The music stopped without warning, and every candle in the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Duke Edmund Hale raised his hand, and the crowd of silk gowns and polished boots fell silent. He was expected to name his bride tonight, and everyone already knew her name. It was supposed to be Lady Victoria Ainsworth, the most admired woman in the region. But when Edmund spoke, he did not say her name. He said, "Elsie Marrow, please come forward." A gasp rippled through the hall. Heads turned toward the far corner, where a young woman in a plain gray dress stood near the wall, holding a tray of empty glasses. She was not a guest. She was a maid who worked in the Hale household, someone the nobles barely noticed when she passed through their halls. Now every eye in the room was fixed on her, and none of them were kind. Elsie felt her hands shake. She had scrubbed floors in this very house that morning. Now the Duke was looking at her as if she belonged among the chandeliers and diamonds. Someone laughed, sharp and cruel, and others joined in, hiding their smiles behind gloved hands. Lady Victoria's face turned pale, then red with fury. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. She must be his secret mistress. Perhaps she has enchanted him. Perhaps the Duke has lost his senses entirely. Edmund did not flinch. He walked down from the raised platform, past the stunned guests, and stopped in front of Elsie. Up close, she looked even smaller against the grandeur around her, but her eyes did not drop to the floor. She held his gaze, confused and afraid, but not ashamed. "I asked you here tonight," Edmund said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "because I intend to marry you." The words landed like thunder. Glasses clinked as hands trembled. A nobleman near the door choked on his wine. Lady Victoria turned and left the hall without a word, her heels striking the marble floor like small explosions of anger. Elsie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. This could not be real. Only weeks ago, she had been polishing silver in his study while he read letters by the fire, barely speaking a word to her. Now he stood before 300 guests, declaring her his future wife. "Your Grace," she finally whispered, "this is not proper. I am only a maid." Edmund's expression softened, though his voice remained steady enough for everyone to hear. "Titles do not decide worth," he said. "Character does." The room buzzed with disbelief, but beneath the mockery something else stirred, a question nobody dared ask aloud. Why would a duke risk everything? His reputation, his family name, his place in society, for a woman who owned nothing but the clothes on her back? Elsie did not know the answer either, but as she stood there, surrounded by judgment and confusion, she noticed something in Edmund's eyes that no one else in the room seemed to see. It was not pity. It was not madness. It looked, strangely, like relief, as though he had been waiting a long time to finally say those words out loud. The whispers grew louder, but neither of them looked away. News of the ballroom scene spread through the estate before the sun rose the next morning. In the kitchen, cooks argued in hushed voices while chopping vegetables too aggressively. In the stables, grooms placed bets on how long the engagement would last. Everyone had a theory, and none of them were flattering to Elsie. "She must have tricked him somehow," said Martha, the head housekeeper, while folding linens with unusual force. "No man of his standing does something like this without a reason hidden underneath." Elsie heard every word through the thin walls of the servants' quarters, and each sentence cut deeper than the last. She had never wanted attention, and now she could not escape it. Former friends among the staff avoided her eyes at breakfast. Others stared too long, searching her face for secrets that were not there. She barely understood it herself. Over the past several months, small moments with Edmund had built quietly, without either of them knowing what was happening. He had once found her caught in a storm near the garden gate and given her his own coat without a word, walking back to the manor soaked through while she stayed dry. Another evening, she accidentally spilled ink across his desk while cleaning, expecting anger, but he had only laughed, the sound surprising them both. There were quiet conversations, too, late at night when he could not sleep, and she was finishing her duties, about his mother's death, about loneliness, about things a duke was never supposed to admit to a servant. None of it had felt like courtship at the time. It had felt like two tired people finding comfort in unexpected company. Meanwhile, in the east wing of the manor, Lord Vesper Crane paced his private study with mounting frustration. As Edmund's cousin and closest living relative besides his young sister, Vesper had always assumed he stood next in line should anything happen to the Duke. A scandalous marriage to a maid threatened to unravel more than just Edmund's reputation. It threatened the inheritance Vesper believed was rightfully close to his reach. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Vesper muttered to his assistant, a thin, nervous man named Harold who nodded along without conviction. "There must be something we can use against her. No woman rises from scrubbing floors to a duke's side without a hidden motive." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps it is simply affection, my lord." Vesper's glare silenced him immediately. Affection does not explain public humiliation in front of the entire county. Find out everything about this Marrow woman. Her family, her past, her debts. Everyone has something to hide. Unaware of the storm gathering against her, Elsie wandered into the private library that afternoon, seeking a few quiet minutes away from prying eyes. She found Edmund there instead, standing by the window with a letter in his hand, his expression unusually tense. "You should not have to face this alone," he said without turning around, as though he had sensed her presence before she spoke. "I owe you an explanation, Elsie. One I should have given you before that ballroom, not after." She stepped closer, her heart pounding with uncertainty. What kind of explanation could possibly justify what had happened? And why did his voice sound as though the truth might change everything she thought she understood about her own life? Edmund finally turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something close to fear behind his composed features. "Sit down," he said gently. "This will take a while to explain, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything." He set the letter down on the desk between them, his fingers lingering on the worn paper as though it carried more weight than parchment should. 15 years ago, this family was nearly destroyed," he began. "My father made poor investments, and creditors circled the estate like vultures waiting for the final collapse. We were weeks away from losing everything, the land, the house, even the roof over our heads." Elsie listened, confused about what this history had to do with her. "A merchant stepped forward during those darkest months," Edmund continued. "A man named Thomas Marrow. He had no obligation to help us. He barely knew my father beyond a few business dealings. Yet he quietly paid off a debt large enough to save this family from ruin, and he asked for nothing in return except one promise. He wanted my father to remember his daughter should anything ever happen to him." The room seemed to tilt beneath Elsie's feet. "My father," she whispered. Edmund nodded slowly. "He passed away only a year after making that promise, before my father could properly repay the kindness. I was young then, barely aware of the arrangement, until I found these letters after my own father's death last year. I spent months searching for any surviving family connected to Thomas Marrow, and eventually the trail led here, to this house, where I discovered you had been working in my kitchen for nearly 2 years without either of us knowing the connection between our families." Elsie's hands trembled in her lap. All this time, she had believed her position in the household was ordinary luck, nothing more than an opening that happened to need filling. "I intended only to honor a debt," Edmund admitted, his voice growing quieter. "But the longer I watched you work, the more I realized gratitude was not the only thing I felt. You never once asked for anything, even after everything your family sacrificed for mine. That kind of character is rare, Elsie, rarer than any title this family holds." Tears gathered in her eyes, though she could not fully name whether they came from grief, relief, or something else entirely. "Why did you not simply tell me the truth from the beginning, instead of announcing marriage in front of the whole county?" Edmund's jaw tightened. "Because I was afraid that if I explained everything quietly, you would refuse out of pride, believing I only wanted to repay a debt. I wanted you to know, without question, that my intentions were never about obligation alone." Before Elsie could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them, and Martha entered with a pale, worried expression. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "there is a matter in the drawing room that requires your immediate attention. Lord Vesper has arrived with visitors, and he insists on speaking with you both together, right away." Elsie noticed the flicker in Edmund's eyes shift from tenderness to caution, and a cold unease settled over her, as though the fragile truth they had just shared was about to be tested by something far less gentle. The drawing room felt colder than the rest of the house, though no window stood open. Lord Vesper stood near the fireplace with three unfamiliar guests, each holding papers that they clutched a little too tightly for comfort. Edmund entered first, with Elsie close behind, and immediately sensed the trap waiting for them. "Cousin," Vesper said with a thin smile, "I thought it best to bring this matter into the open before it grows into something far more damaging." He gestured toward the guests, introducing them as respected members of the Merchant Council. One of them stepped forward and unfolded a letter, reading aloud words supposedly written by Elsie herself, promising financial gain in exchange for pursuing the Duke's affection. The handwriting resembled hers closely enough to convince anyone unfamiliar with the truth. Elsie's breath caught in her throat. "I never wrote this," she said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I have never seen this letter in my life." Vesper's expression remained calm, almost sympathetic on the surface. "Denial is expected," he said smoothly, "but the evidence speaks clearly enough on its own." Word of the accusation spread through the manor within hours, faster than any servant could contain it. By evening, the staff who once merely gossiped now openly avoided Elsie entirely, afraid association might cost them their positions. Even Martha, who had known Elsie for 2 years, could not meet her eyes across the dinner hall. Edmund confronted Vesper privately that night, his anger barely restrained beneath a controlled voice. "You forged this," he said, holding the letter inches from his cousin's face. "I know Elsie's handwriting well enough to see the difference, even if strangers cannot." Vesper did not deny it outright, only smiled faintly. "Perception matters more than truth in situations like this, cousin. The damage is already done, regardless of what you or I know privately." Overwhelmed by the accusations and the sudden coldness surrounding her, Elsie made a difficult decision that night. She packed a small bag with what few belongings she owned and slipped quietly toward the servants' entrance before dawn, believing her presence had become more burden than blessing to the man she had grown to care for deeply. She barely reached the iron gates at the edge of the property when a familiar voice called out behind her, carrying urgency she had never heard from him before. "Elsie, stop," Edmund said, breathless from running across the frosted courtyard. "Please do not leave like this." She turned, tears freezing against her cold cheeks. "I cannot let you lose everything because of me," she said. "Your family, your reputation, all of it is being threatened, and I refuse to be the reason it collapses." Edmund closed the distance between them, his expression fierce with a determination she had not fully witnessed before. "Then let me fix this properly," he said. "Not by hiding you away, but by exposing the truth in front of everyone who dared to mock you." 3 days later, the county's most influential families gathered once again, this time for a formal dinner hosted specifically at Edmund's request. Whispers followed Elsie the moment she entered the hall beside him, though she held her head high despite the lingering doubt in the room. Edmund stood before the guests, holding both the forged letter and an original sample of Elsie's actual handwriting, provided honestly by Martha, who had finally chosen loyalty over fear after learning the full truth. "Compare these carefully," Edmund announced, presenting both documents to the Merchant Council representative who had spoken against Elsie previously. "Notice the difference in the slant of every letter, the pressure of the pen, details any trained eye can identify once given the chance to look properly." The representative studied both samples for several tense minutes before admitting, with visible discomfort, that the documents did not match convincingly under closer inspection. Vesper attempted to interject, but Edmund cut him off sharply. "I also have testimony from Harold, your own assistant, confirming who requested the false letter be written in the first place." Gasps spread through the hall as Vesper's confident expression finally cracked, his schemes unraveling in front of the very audience he had hoped to manipulate. Edmund turned toward Elsie, his voice softening as he addressed the room directly. "I did not choose Elsie out of pity, nor obligation, nor confusion," he said firmly. "I chose her because she is the only person who has ever valued who I am, rather than what I hold. That is worth more than any title this family carries." Slowly, reluctantly, heads throughout the room began to lower in quiet acknowledgement, the mocking whispers of previous weeks fading into something resembling respect. Their wedding took place months later beneath clear skies, attended by many of the same families who had once laughed at the announcement. This time, no one whispered cruelty behind gloved hands. Instead, they watched as Elsie walked forward, no longer viewed as a plain maid unworthy of attention, but as a woman whose quiet strength had ultimately proven stronger than every doubt cast against her. As Edmund took her hand before the gathered crowd, he smiled, not for the audience, but for her alone, knowing that whatever challenges still awaited them, they would face everyone together, as equals in every way that truly mattered.